House Bill 2364, relating to sales of residential dwelling facilities.
Recognize Senator Jeff Golden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, House Bill 2364 is a bill that addresses part of our affordable housing problem, a very specific part that relates to mobile home and manufactured home parks. I think we've all become aware of a unique problem for many of the tenants of those parks in recent years, in which they find themselves in a status that we might call captive consumers. They own their homes, they own the physical structure and not the land on which the home sits. They obviously pay a rent for that. Now, we have seen in recent years, the last decade especially, a trend in which these rental spaces are skyrocketing in price as mobile home parks become of increasing interest to a variety of corporate entities, from holding companies to REITs to other creatures of the tax code, such that the rent becomes unaffordable for many of these tenants. Now, if they lived in an apartment or a townhouse or a condominium, they would be free consumers. They could say, this is getting too spendy, I'm going to find something I can afford. In this particular case, they can't do that. Their option is to look for a space that they would find affordable, if they can find one, and then to move their home to that space. In the case of many of these homes, owned by, I would say predominantly seniors with fixed incomes, many of the homes can't be moved at all structurally anymore. If you can move them, it's at a cost of many $1,000s. It's not affordable. They don't have a choice. They are captive consumers. One of the really interesting alternatives that is being explored around the country, is slowly emerging in Oregon and elsewhere, are programs where tenants can cooperatively purchase these parks when they come up for sale and work out organizations where they have equity and security in the land underneath their homes. I think that's a very interesting and possibly fruitful idea, but it's not happening very often. There are a few, but there are two major hurdles. One is the amount of money involved. The fact is that these organizations, these speculative organizations, have the ability to bring to the table much more money than these tenant groups can and make much more attractive offers to the sellers. Not much to be done about that. The second hurdle is the ability of a buyer to move fast and expeditiously when a property comes up for sale. Major speculators can often put together a deal after a 10-minute phone call with their financial institution. Groups of tenants can't. They are not professional investors. They have not developed relationships with lenders. They don't have the right kind of attorneys on retainer. It takes a little time for them to put together a credible and competitive offer. This is where this legislation comes in. It might be able to help in some cases. It modestly lengthens some of the relevant time periods required under current law. One example is the amount of time that tenants have to form a committee and tell an owner that they'd like to proffer a proposal to buy the park extends from 10 days in current law to 15 days in this bill. There are a few other similar extensions of deadlines. The bill also allows a fine of up to 10% of the purchase price if a seller chooses to ignore this process altogether. Essentially, this bill requires sellers of these parks to slow down a little, I would emphasize a little, before completing a transaction to a more traditional buyer. It does not tell sellers who they have to sell to. It does not choose winners and losers among potential purchasers. It doesn't even give tenants a first right of refusal on properties, which a number of advocates think that it should. It doesn't do that. It only does one thing. It tells park owners they need to slow down, practically speaking, perhaps as much as a month or so, before completing a deal to non-tenants. In return, some number of Oregonians will gain the practical opportunity, not the certainty, but the opportunity, to escape the status of captive consumers and rest easy that they'll be able to stay in their own homes. I ask for your aye vote on Senate Bill 2364A. Thank you.